Good evening and welcome. I'm April Peters and I will be moderating the All Candidates panel. This is one in a series of All Candidates meetings that Rogers Community Channel is running up until the election. On this program, candidates are here from the ridings of Vancouver-Fraserview and Vancouver-Langara. In the second half of our program, we will hear from the Vancouver-Langara candidates, but we begin with Vancouver-Fraserview. From the Social Credit Party, Jonathan Baker. From the Liberal Party, Rod Raglan. And from the Green Party, Stuart Parker. NDP candidate Bernie Simpson and Libertarian candidate John Clark are unable to attend. Welcome to all of you who were able to attend. Our media panelists are Ian Mass, political analyst and host of Rogers Cityline, and Moira McLean from CKNW. We'll begin with a 1-minute opening statement from each candidate. The candidates will then have 2 minutes to answer reporters' questions. The other candidates will have a chance to respond, and they will be given 1 minute. Jonathan Baker will start off with his opening statement, followed by Rod Raglan and then Stuart Parker. Mr. Baker?
Hi, well, I'm Jonathan Baker. I have been elected. I was elected to the school board in the 70s and early 80s, and was a city alderman after that until the last election. The election in Fraserview is an interesting race, because it's actually a two-way race between the Liberals and the Socreds. And of course, with the Stuart Parker and the Green Party providing a strong third-party alternative, I think the NDP has kind of been knocked out of the whole race by a problem they seem to have had concerning ethics of their candidate. The issues presented are the issues that really, I think, exist throughout the province, and that is the need for good, stable government, for a stable labor climate, and for developing and improving our health system. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Baker. And Mr. Raglan?
The overriding issue in this entire election is one of trust. And the people of Vancouver-Fraserview have to ask themselves, who can they trust? Do they trust someone who has lived and worked among them for the last 20 years, someone who's published the local newspaper for the past 16 years and wrote a column every week? Sometimes they didn't agree with me, but certainly they knew where I was coming from. Someone who has a long and dedicated record of commitment to the community, or as my opponents, major opponents in any case, people who are new to the community. I think that as well as trust, the other issues are primarily crime prevention, education, and health care.
Thank you, Mr. Raglan. And Mr. Parker?
The world is in danger. Greed is out of control. We are experiencing an ecological crisis right now. How can this not be the major issue in the election we are facing on the 17th, tomorrow? How can it not be the major issue that we develop policies that support human survival? And that is the issue that is at stake right now, and that is the issue that will be at stake in the next several years. We are imperiling the health of our planet. We are imperiling the health of our children and those who are living in this society by our throwaway, unconscious, short-term attitude toward profit and toward our treatment of the physical environment and of the people living within that physical environment. What is needed right now is a voice of leadership, not a political leader, but a voice talking about new directions, new ideas, and fundamental changes necessary for the human race to survive.
Thank you, Mr. Parker. Ian, we'll begin with you, and your first question is for Jonathan Baker.
Mr. Baker, I think that Moberly School, which is pretty well smack dab in the middle of this Fraserview riding, is a microcosm of what's going on in Vancouver. Got 800-900 kids in that school, children in that school, 12 portables. About 90% of the parents are English as second language. Vancouver School Board says there's just not enough money to service that school or many of the other ones in Vancouver. Is it a matter of not enough money, or just the resources aren't being allocated in the right way?
Well, I think resources aren't being allocated in the right way. If I was elected, I would, first of all, feel that in terms of the province as a whole, there has to be a recognition that urban areas simply require more funding because they have much greater problems. They have the whole question of an immigrant population. And urban areas, there's a lot more poverty. And the nature and degree of problems is quite different from rural areas. So I would press for simply more money and a better distribution to urban areas in general. The other thing that has to be remembered, though, is that there has been a massive influx into the area. The demographics have changed, and it's happened quite recently. And it is difficult to keep right on top of that, and to have a school construction program that parallels a massive influx of immigrants. But I think that immigration is the sincerest form of flattery. And I think it's a great asset to the community that this is happening, but the government is going to have to allocate more funds to it.
Mr. Ragland, if you wish to respond.
Thank you, April. Particularly in Vancouver-Fraserview, the problems are very acute. We have a big development going down just below Marine Drive called the Fraser Lands. By 1997, 4,000 additional people will live there. This is already putting tremendous pressure on our local schools, and not just Moberly, but also Douglas, Tecumseh. I think I had an opportunity when I ran for school trustee in the fall of last year of touring some of these schools, and I was absolutely shocked to see children being taught on the school auditorium stage and in basements. And we just have to prioritize this money, and a Liberal government, if elected, would change the property tax, take it away from the funding for schools from the property tax into general revenues. And I also would encourage additional money from the federal government for ESL, as well as cultural liaison officers, which would help overcome the problems that immigrant children have between the school system and their families.
Mr. Parker, if you would like to respond.
Yes, certainly. I think there are two problems of which this is a symptom. One of which is the lack of priority that education has received in government. And I think that the best way to deal with this problem, rather than tell the provincial government to do that or tell the provincial government to do this, is ask the provincial government to decentralize the tax base away from the provincial finance and education ministries to local school boards and local city councils. And I think in the long term that's part of the solution. I guess the other question is, how do you support a community that continues to grow and grow and grow? We have to look at our priorities right now and say, can we afford ecologically to concentrate even more population in the lower Fraser Valley when we are clearly stressing our watersheds, stressing our agricultural potential? Maybe it's time to look at a steady state population here in the lower Fraser Valley.
Thank you. Moira, if you would direct your question to Mr. Ragland.
Yes. As you said in your opening statement, you head the Liberal Party's Urban Safety Committee, and the City of Vancouver is facing some real problems with their police force and funding and their general budget process that they're going through right now. They're having a real hard time. They've asked the police force to look at ways that they could cut back 5%. And what's come back has been possibly eliminating the liaison with the Chinese community or the East Indian community. What can the provincial government do to help alleviate some of the Vancouver Police Department's problems?
Well, we can't afford to cut back the police in Vancouver. Those cutbacks that you're suggesting would also eliminate the crime prevention officers, and so our police would only be responding to crimes instead of trying to prevent them. We could do two things that would not increase the taxpayers in the taxes of Vancouver residents at all. One is we could get the provincial government to give us equitable funding for our municipal police force. Right now they fund 1% of the police budget, where in other cities like Nelson they fund up to 32%. If we got equitable funding, we could put 48 more police officers on the street. The other thing they could do is have provincial employees staff the jail. We're the only city, only municipality in British Columbia that has its policemen staffing their own jails. If we had provincial employees staffing the jail, another 24 police officers could be patrolling the street as opposed to sitting in the jail. If the SOCREDs are really sincere about crime busting, as Rita has come out and said, they have to give us, first of all, equitable funding. They have to come up with a comprehensive crime prevention program. You just can't keep hiring more and more police. I've been involved in a number of programs, from Block Watch to Crime Watch, which has neighbors patrolling their own streets in their own cars with police walkie-talkies, to Business Watch, and I'm a real proponent of community police stations. And those could be staffed by civilian personnel as well as volunteers to keep the costs down. But it focuses crime prevention programs in a neighborhood. It lessens the anxiety among the residents, and it also gives us an opportunity to disseminate crime prevention materials.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ragland. And your response, Mr. Parker?
Well, yes, I think that at this stage, if we want to deal with the problems that we're facing now, it does look like cutbacks in the police force are not going to help. But we also have to look at the long term. We have to look at the causal relationship between crime and other factors in our society. The fact is, we live in a society that glorifies violence. We live in a society where the legislature voted unanimously to endorse, to congratulate the troops for a job well done in the Gulf. We live in a society, I think, that has in its entertainment industry, in the toys we give our children, a real bias toward encouraging violence as a socially acceptable form of behavior. And I think we've got to start at the education system. We have to make it more egalitarian, more cooperative, less competitive, and less violent.
Your comments, Mr. Baker?
Well, you should remember that many of the priorities you're talking about are set by the City of Vancouver. The City of Vancouver, which spent $1 million on hiring a suite review staff to close down suites in neighborhoods like our own that we represent, that's $1 million a year that could be going to policing. When you go and ask an agency to review its own budget, very often the agency, whether it's the police or any department, they obviously don't want to cut, and so they will go after the most vulnerable services. And you can't blame the provincial government for that. You know, that's the reason perestroika doesn't work so well either. So I think there are management problems that have to be looked at. It is not all a question of more money, but more value for the dollar.
Ian, your question directed to Mr. Parker?
Mr. Parker, fairly short question. What specifically would you do to green Fraserview?
Well, sure. Give the Green Party the environmental question. Thank you. Well, I guess one of the things we need to do is put an absolute stop on increasing housing density in Fraserview. If we want a community that is green, we cannot continue to increase the human population that is impacting on it. We also need to look at programs not just to develop parks, but to develop ecological corridors that are based on the creeks and streams that once ran through the riding that we now live in, that is urban sprawl.
But how do you get people to stop coming to Vancouver?
I think what we need to do is have. Right now we have a population that is not at replacement level. If we didn't have immigration, our population would be decreasing. We simply need to change our immigration priorities. We need to decrease the number of entrepreneurial immigrants that we are taking in. I'm not in any way suggesting decreasing the number of refugees or the quantity of humanitarian immigration. I think that is quite a livable priority in the context of our own population, which is declining. I guess other priorities toward greening Fraserview, we need programs so that there's adequate public transit so people feel comfortable leaving their cars at home. We need a phased-in approach whereby over the course of the next 5 to 10 years, we need to make more and more of Vancouver a no-car zone. And I think that's not just our responsibility to greening the riding, that's our responsibility to greening the planet, which is at the moment surrounded in a grayish-brown haze. And I think that suggests that dealing with atmospheric problems should probably be our first priority, although it doesn't particularly result in governments being able to say, look, we've set aside this pretty wilderness. It's actually getting down and dealing with real ecological problems.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Parker. And Mr. Baker, any comments?
Well, I don't think we can, I think it's silly to suggest that we can close down Vancouver and stop growth. But we can't do that. The people are coming, and I think it's ridiculous to suggest that only people who don't bring money and capital to create jobs should come. your question was, what would I do, what would one do for the immediate riding? And I feel the most urgent problem in education in any event is to provide adequate funding for ESL, because we have a massive influx of people, largely Chinese and Indo-Canadian. And secondly, I think we have to add heritage language programs in the school and make them optional.
I'm sorry, Mr. Baker, we were specifically asking about the environment in your riding.
The environment is one thing. Prevent them from allowing the subdivision of the Fraserview Golf Course, which the Parks Board, Mr. Cowie, I believe, have proposed. That should be stopped cold.
Okay. I'm sorry, your time is up for your comment. Mr. Ragland, any response?
Yes. I think we should perhaps ask what have candidates done as opposed to what should be done. As the publisher of the community newspaper in the area for 16 years, I was the first weekly newspaper to use recycled newsprint in Western Canada. Cost an arm and a leg, and we had to ship it in from Portland, but I felt so concerned about the environment that I wanted to see that done. The other thing is that I've worked very closely with the Friends of Fraserview, which is the group that has worked to stop the housing development on the Fraserview Golf Course. As a matter of fact, Art had stepped aside as chairperson at that time, so he wasn't necessarily responsible in initiating that program. But I think it's important to have a record of environmental concerns as opposed to just espousing what you would do if indeed you had the opportunity.
Okay, fine. Maura, it's your turn to address a question to Jonathan Baker.
I had the pleasure at Vancouver City Council last week to see Don Gettleman get up and talk about his vision for Hastings Park, and basically over his dead body is the city plan going to be followed through if he's elected in that riding. Your position has been stated quite differently. Is there a party position on Hastings Park, and what kind of guarantees can you give to the people of Vancouver that if you're elected that you'll help the city along with its plans for the park?
Well, I think that, first of all, I don't know if there is a party position. I don't think there is, but I don't think there needs to be. The land will belong to the city of Vancouver on the expiration of the lease with the P&E. It's been deeded to the city of Vancouver, and the city of Vancouver's only obligation is to hold it in trust for the enjoyment of the people. So I think the city is going to have full power to plan for that land as it does for other land. I think the province has an interest in a fair, and I would like to see a fair that more approaches the quality of Expo. Maybe it should take place every 2 or 3 years, but a high-quality fair. And I don't think the city would object. The city has never said they don't want a fair there. They simply have said they want control of the land and they want to demolish some buildings. I question the wisdom of the city's approach, but I don't question the fact that they have jurisdiction.
Okay, Mr. Ragland, your response?
I think the Gordon Wilson has responded to this question in the Vancouver agenda, and I think generally we've agreed that with Vancouver's position, the City Council's position, I think we would support more greening of Hastings Park, as well as, but I would also want to retain the fair. It is not only something that I've grown up with, and I'd hate to see it go, but I really think it's a good opportunity for a lot of young people to have employment for part of the summer at least.
Didn't I read in your position that you would like to see an expanded playland?
In my position?
Yeah. That the retention of playland?
Oh, I would like to retain playland. I think it's actually to some degree a tourist attraction, and people who are in the know tell me that the roller coaster is one of the best in North America, so I'd hate to see it go.
And Mr. Parker, your comment?
Well, if we are going to hold on to having a fair, and I think that considering the kind of fair we have now, it might be more appropriate in Langley, but if we are going to hold on to having a fair, we need to look at issues of, I guess, modernizing not only how the fair works, but the attitudes displayed there. I think that there are many people in green politics who are concerned about the treatment of animals at the fair, and I think that that's an important thing. As Mr. Ragland says, there are a lot of young people who go to this fair, and I think it's important we teach young people respect for species other than humans. As to Hastings Park, I think it's very important we increase the amount of green space in the city, and perhaps even look at turning some of it over to community gardening projects so that we start producing some of our food locally here.
Okay, Ian, your question will be directed to Mr. Reglan.
Mr. Reglan, I heard the all candidates debate at the South Van Neighborhood House, and I heard you explain the Liberals' policy on housing. But you added something to it that intrigued me. You talked about the densification of Vancouver as one way of bringing down land costs. Having watched City Council for 15 years and citizens groups, densification is not high on the agenda of neighborhoods. How would you plan to pull that off?
Well, one of the things that I would do is relax. Well, I don't have the authority to do it, but I would propose that they relax the height requirements on commercial buildings. Right now, in most of Vancouver, you can go up 3 stories. Well, if you take a look at what the commercial land costs are, it is really prohibitive to put up a building that is 3 stories high. You just can't get the rent to pay the mortgage. So what we're having, particularly in East Vancouver, is old buildings just staying where they are. They're just not being developed, or they're being developed by offshore money that doesn't want to get a return that is, I suppose, what someone Vancouverite might want. So my concern is that if we increase the height that a person can go 5 or 6 stories, then you could have maybe 3 stories of apartments above, underground parking, so it shouldn't really impact that much on the neighborhood. You'd want to take into consideration views and things like that, so you wouldn't be restricting people's views of the water or that sort of thing. But primarily, it's along commercial areas, and it wouldn't really impact that much on the neighborhood. Would really stimulate local business in areas of East Vancouver and where they need that, and just provide a lot more housing for people.
Your response, Mr. Parker?
Well, an increase in density, that's somewhat disturbing. The fact is, we're talking about increasing the total amount of business that goes on in Vancouver and the total amount of industry. That means increasing the total amount of carbon dioxide being produced by Vancouver. We hear that we have to cut back our carbon dioxide output by 50% in order to be an ecologically sustainable society.
But
we have to look at responsibility toward not just this generation, but toward future generations if we're going to make choices to increase the amount of carbon dioxide we are putting out. Economic growth equals an increase in carbon dioxide and methane. That is a proven fact, and we have to address that before we keep making pie-in-the-sky promises about how you can make the pie bigger and bigger and bigger, rather than dividing it out more fairly.
wouldn't a mix of commercial businesses and apartments have people living where they worked and not driving? Walking down 3 stories to where they work, or down the street to do their shopping rather than taking their cars.
I think we have to. I think we have to develop community business incentives, but the way we're going to do it is not by increasing our density and making because we. And in order for a business to be profitable here, it has to be profitable in the context of the world market. And we need to take BC out of the world market if we really want to gain control over our own economic destiny.
Mr. Baker, your response.
Well, these gentlemen would make excellent aldermen. This is a responsibility of the City of Vancouver. The provincial government has nothing to do with it and shouldn't have anything to do with it. If you want my aldermanic advice, the council should do what the neighborhood wants. If they want an increase of density, they should have it. If they don't, they shouldn't. But it has nothing at all to do with the provincial government, and I would say the province should keep out of the zoning of the neighborhood.
Maura, your question, please, to Mr. Parker.
You've talked, and your platform states a lot about community-based decisions. An issue like transit is something that needs to be planned on a region-wide basis. How can you balance off allowing decisions to be made right in the community and an issue like that you've stated is important, that we have regional transit needs addressed, and I mean, you talk about things like banning cars in the downtown core. How does it balance off?
Well, as the Green Party has always stated, we need to have a strategy based on macro watersheds. The Fraser Valley, the area from Hope to West Vancouver to Bellingham, needs to develop a strategy. And the Greens are very much in support of reinforcing and changing the nature of regional government so that many powers that are in the hands of provincial and federal governments be handed to a government on a regional level similar to the GVRD. yes, we need community-based decision-making, but I think there's also a great deal in Green Party policy about regionally-based decision-making, and we need to start organizing much more along the lines of our watersheds. And so I guess we believe in appropriate decentralization. There are certain matters that are clearly best dealt with in the hands of local communities, just as there are clearly matters that are best dealt with by regional authorities. And I think that issues like air quality, water quality, and a large-scale transportation strategy are areas that really clearly need a greatly reinforced and improved regional government structure to deal with.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Baker, your response, please.
Well, forget what the question was. That's all that.
Maura, would you like to?
Transit, and who should be responsible for transit? Where
the authority that should be responsible for transit is that there's a need to create a transit authority that, in accordance with what the City of Vancouver has requested, the GVRD basically should be responsible for transit planning in the area. It shouldn't be done by a provincial agency, but it has to be done cooperatively by all of the municipalities, and they need a structure to accomplish that. If that's done, if that is done, then we can get on to a sensible system. But right now, the way it's working, it is not working properly.
But the local governments don't pay the bills on transit. I mean, they pay the operating costs, but certainly they don't pay the capital costs. So isn't the basic theory of government the authority that pays the bills should have the authority?
No, the transit should be handled much as any highways. In an urban area, you must have a transit system. In rural areas, you don't need it so much, but in urban areas, you do. I think the funding should come provincially. A portion may come locally, but the planning of it should be entirely locally and not provincially.
Mr. Ragland, if you would like to respond to this question.
I feel about the same as Jonathan does on this matter. I would like to see the responsibility for transit enshrined in the Bill of Rights for municipalities, which I certainly support. And I would think that the provincial, it's bad enough that we have to pay for the using transit. You know, I mean the operating cost of transit. And I don't think that should be the cost of building transit and maintaining it should be put onto the local taxpayers.
Thank you. Ian, if you would like to direct your next question to Mr. Baker.
Mr. Baker, there's a freestanding abortion clinic just outside of Fraserview, the region, but certainly in Vancouver South at 43rd and Victoria. Maybe I should just ask you quite simply your position and social credit position on abortion.
My personal position on abortion is that in terms of medical procedures, it is certainly a low priority for funding. As long as there's a waiting list for cancer clinics and for AIDS and for things like that, I strongly oppose the NDP position, Mr. Harcourt, which was to have to spend money on neighborhood abortion clinics, all over the province. So my personal view is that abortion is a matter of choice for people in the first trimester. After that, I think other issues come into play. But I don't think it is right to be pouring money into neighborhood abortion clinics all over the province. And that appears to have been a proposal which Mr. Harcourt may have backed off from, but I don't know if he backed off from that any more than he did from all the other promises he made.
How about hospital boards that, can basically say you can't have an abortion in huge parts of the province?
I quite frankly don't think hospital boards should have control over the particular medical procedures. I think they can set priorities with it, and say we're going to spend more money on meeting the needs for radiation therapy as opposed to something else. But to say that you're going to perform cataract operations in a certain way, or that you're not going to perform abortions at all, I don't think boards should do that. I think it's a scientific and medical issue that is not to be decided by lay boards.
On the issue then of abortions and hospital boards, if they should in fact be elected, Mr. Ragland, your response.
Well, can I mention abortion clinics? I don't live far from that abortion clinic at 43rd and Victoria Drive, and I tell you, it has torn that community apart. And regardless of what your position is on abortion, if Mr. Simpson, who is not here unfortunately to defend his party's stand on abortion, if he lived in the community that he wanted to represent, he would know that this has just been a terrible thing to happen to that neighborhood. We have the small business people don't have adequate parking now because of the protesters are always there. The people in the neighborhood have cars parked in front of their houses constantly. We have a light at 43rd and Victoria Drive that is pedestrian operated, and a number of young children come to school along there. And I find it really appalling that kids that are 7 and 8 years old have to be confronted with these horrific pictures by these protesters. So definitely, there certainly seems to me to be enough access to abortion throughout the province without having these clinics, on every second corner, as the NDP seem to want to put them.
Mr. Parker, your response.
Well, I don't usually find myself defending NDP positions, and perhaps I don't toe the NDP line all the way, but I think it's extremely important, if we're interested in long-term social and medical health, to develop women's health centers, and that is what every women's health clinic is. It is not simply an abortion clinic. It carries out counseling. It's involved in all issues of reproductive health. And yes, I think there are some costs that are going to be levied because the bigots and the, others who are against choice for women are going to try and make this difficult. But I think it's a process we really need, and it's a service that really badly needs to be provided. The Green Party is unequivocally in support of choice for women on the abortion issue, and we have to make our society one where abortion is accessible as a right, not a privilege.
Thank you very much for your comments, and in fact our time is up for the first portion of our debate, but the candidates now have 1 minute for their closing statements. Mr. Ragland will start, followed by Mr. Parker, and then Mr. Baker.
Thank you very much. I want to say that the Liberal programs are not designed to serve the hidden agendas of the so-called big business. They're not designed to serve the hidden agendas of the NDP's big business. We have our own agenda, and we really believe it's the agenda of the people of BC. We bring no baggage with us into this election. We're not beholden to anyone. We are our own people. The only thing that the Liberals share in common, or maybe other things, but two things we share, is a commitment to better government and a new vision for British Columbia. This time, I'd like the people of Vancouver-Fraserview to say no to polarized politics and the mudslinging they've seen throughout this debate. Say no to lies and deceit and conflicts of interest, intimidation. Say yes to a Liberal. Say yes to Rod Ragland, their neighbor, someone they can trust.
Thank you. And Mr. Parker?
Well, you have a choice in this election. It's a choice between the forces of unlimited economic growth and consumerism and Greens. Yes, there's quite a bit of apparent choice between the major parties, but they are all unequivocally committed to increasing the industrial output of this planet tenfold and doubling its population. They have all endorsed the Brundtland Commission report set down by the United Nations, saying that this is how we're going to deal with environmental problems. You have a question of vision. Can you trust the vision of somebody who says, we don't want so much to redistribute wealth, we just want to create wealth. We want to make the pie bigger and bigger and bigger. Well, how do you make the pie bigger? I don't see the circumference of the earth increasing right now. In fact, I see us depleting our resources because of our short-term attitudes. To encourage people to vote for a party with vision and a party with the courage to call for not what we can reasonably expect to be done, but what needs to be done.
Thank you very much, Mr. Parker. And in fact, thanks to all of the candidates for taking time out on the eve of the election day. For their participation, Jonathan Baker of the Social Credit Party, Rod Ragland of the Liberal Party, and Stuart Parker of the Green Party. But don't go away. In a few moments, we will introduce candidates for Vancouver-Langara. But first, let's see what happens when provincial politics makes its way into Vancouver Council chambers, as it did recently. The issues discussed were Hastings Park and its future, transit and transportation planning, and police issues.
Yes, we will do what we can in cooperation only, not in confrontation, but to work as cooperatively as we can to get that park to what it is supposed to be, to get it to the green space as quickly as we can for all of us who live on the east side. And we will do that at the same time as ensuring that the PNE exists and is enhanced so that it remains an event for all of British Columbia.
This recommendation and a limited viewpoint must not be allowed to go forward. The Pacific National Exhibition is the home of the BC Racetrack, the Vancouver Canucks, Vancouver Playland, and yes, the 17-day agricultural fair. Numerous sporting, entertainment, and business events are held throughout the year in all of the facilities on a rental basis. The integrated use of the Pacific National Exhibition has changed it to a viable and successful business operation.
I support the establishment of a Greater Vancouver Regional Transit Authority that will plan for a region or metropolitan area. Planning for Richmond or Vancouver just doesn't make sense separately. Should a link between Vancouver and Richmond prove to be essential, I personally support a transit link along Cambie Street. I strongly urge, however, that it be underground.
To be effective, there must be a strategy providing sufficient public transportation and bicycle routes for commuters. This will go along with the ban on privately owned motor vehicles from the downtown core. In the long term, we have to start comprehensive and intelligent city planning to encourage and allow people to work where they live.
I believe we're losing ground in the war against crime in the city of Vancouver because the social credit government does not provide the municipality with equal treatment in supporting police services. Vancouver receives only 1% of their police budget, while Victoria receives about 7%, Westminster receives 11%, and Nelson receives 32%. If Vancouver received comparable funding to other municipal police forces, approximately 46 more police officers could be hired to bolster crime prevention programs, patrol units, and cut down on the ever-increasing response time to 911 calls.
I can think of police and the policing approach to dealing with social problems as just one very minor but major. It's minor because it can hardly operate in a vacuum, but major because where there's violence, where there is consternation and confusion and fear on the part of the public, there has to be assertive action, and we have to have sufficient complements of police to address those issues.
And my apologies for losing track of Jonathan Baker's closing statement, and in fact we've offered Mr. Baker his minute now.
Well, in the end, I think in the final analysis, the election is going to turn on which party can best handle the economy and jobs. I think there's no question that British Columbia is in better shape than any jurisdiction in North America. 28,000 jobs have been created in Canada during the last month, I believe, and 20,000 of them were in British Columbia. The record of the NDP when they've taken power has been to scare the devil out of capital and simply flee. And I suspect that's one of the reasons the NDP is not represented here tonight. So I thank you very much, and I hope I'll be supported in my riding tomorrow in Fraserview.
Thank you, Mr. Baker. And welcome back to the second portion of our All Candidates debate. I'm Averill Peters. We now turn to the riding of Vancouver-Langara.